This week, our topic is on STEM, social movements, and personalized learning. And as you can see, there are a lot of resources this week to consider as we look at these social movements and really talk about how they may or may not leverage STEM and career and technical education curricula. And in fact, those are the first two objectives. Describe how STEM, social movements, and personalized learning may leverage STEM and CT curricula. And the second objective for this week, identify skills promoted by makers, geniuses, and coders that are part of CTE curriculum. So some of these social movements may be very familiar to some of you. Maker movements have been around at least since 2012 now. If you just Google maker spaces in my community, you probably will be able to find something closer nearby. If you haven't heard about them, this is something that is a big social movement. I think it's kind of maybe not losing or maybe plateauing in terms of steam that it's had moving forward. The two other movements that we'll talk about this week are coding and the Genius Hour. And there'll be others come along, but these are social movements related to STEM and have implications for career and technical education. This week you have four articles. The first two are peer-reviewed publications on the topic of the maker movement. The last two are publications from Educational Leadership magazine, very recent publications. And the article that I chose for you was on the genius of design, which really has connections to the Genius Hour, the Hour of Code, and engineering design. And then the other article is kind of a critical review of personalized learning related to cognitive understanding and how people learn, and whether or not these types of educational efforts really get at in-depth learning. I want you to read this not just from the idea of do these activities and these social movements encourage deeper learning, but also think about things that this author might be missing in terms of 21st century learning skills and other things that may come about as a result of these social movements related to STEM and career and technical education. In addition to these readings, you have resources that I'm going to discuss in this video, and there are additional videos that should help you with answering or responding to this week's engagement question, where I'm really interested in what you think about these social movements and how they relate to what we would consider formal education. And also, as a reminder, your action plans are due, and hopefully you all will be working on those. So just a few quick slides to talk about these three social movements, and there's probably some others, but these are the biggies. What is the maker movement? Chris Anderson, a former chief of Wired magazine, defines the movement as a new industrial revolution. He distinguishes between the maker movement and the tinkers, inventors, or entrepreneurs of prior eras by referencing three key characteristics: the use of digital desktop tools, a cultural norm of sharing designs and collaboration online, and the use of common design standards to facilitate sharing and fast iteration. Now, some folks would say this is a kind of very focused in and more focused really on technology, electronic technology, and others would say makers is far more than that, bringing in textiles and food making and all kinds of things. And when you look at images for what a maker space looks like, I think you'll agree this is somewhat of a narrow definition, and especially if you look at the resources this week and do the readings, that this is a somewhat narrow relating only to some of the technological aspects of maker spaces. What do these places look like? They are big rooms oftentimes with all the CTE lab stuff you've ever seen thrown into one place. I've visited some of these where you have, sewing machines and sinks and CNC machines and welding and soldering facilities, computer technology setups, Arduino board places, lots of testing equipment, 3D printers, and in fact, we'll take a look at a couple of these in just a moment to see what some of them look like. All you have to do is Google maker spaces and you'll see images from these kinds of places. Some of them are kind of messy, and most of them, though, will have a variety of resources available to make just about anything. What is the Hour of Code? The Hour of Code started as a 1-hour introduction to computer science designed to demystify code and to show that anybody can learn the basics and to broaden participation in the field of computer science. The Hour of Code is a global movement reaching tens of millions of students in 180 plus countries. Anyone, anywhere can organize their Hour of Code event. 1-hour tutorials are available in 45 languages. No experience is needed. And you'll be looking at that website, hourofcode.com. What is Genius Hour? That's the other social movement I really want to take some time with this week. The movement that allows students to explore their own passions and encourages creativity in the classroom. It provides students with a choice of what they learn during a set period of time during school. And this grew out of really what Google does for all of their engineers. They allow 20% of their time during a week to explore other innovations that could be part of a Google landscape. And so Gmail grew out of these, Google Talk grew out of these, Hangouts grew out of these. But these types of activities where they have their engineers really exploring some other questions have enabled, a Google Wave grew out of one of these. That was one that didn't go anywhere, and there are others that didn't go anywhere. But they really felt like this was a time when they could turn that innovation and hopefully spark something new, some new application for Google databases and how Google works. So this then spawned the Genius Hour, a time set aside for you to really pursue your passions. And that is part of the readings this week. It is more individualized than project-based learning, as you will learn, and I'm interested in your concepts or your comments. And I'm interested on your comments related to project-based learning and Genius Hour. This is taken from the geniushour.com website. And then we're going to come back here at the end after we take a look at some of the resources or websites I want to highlight related to these topics. What are the implications of these social movements on formal education or CTE and STEM education? And that's really your discussion question for this week. So if we can go back to the resources, I want to take a look at the first link that I'm providing for you. This is actually a link to a University of Wisconsin Stout. Interestingly enough, they have credit courses on this topic taken in their graduate program, in their online course graduate program. And if you scroll down, you can see all of the other courses that they offer. But this one right here, the Makerspace Culture, it's an entire course, 3-credit course on the makerspace culture. They also have one on project-based learning and flipped classrooms, computer coding and computational thinking. These tie directly into the social movements related to STEM and of course have implications for career and technical education. So if you click on learn more, it'll tell you a little bit more about that course. You will learn how to build makerspace in your school, articulate relationships between makerspaces and academic disciplines, guide students through design, apply learning theories that support making principles, designing learning activities, align instructional goals, demonstrate appropriate teaching and assessment behaviors for maker space environments, and unleash your creativity for innovative tools and ideas. And so it talks about the course, who's invited. Sounds like an interesting course to me. Sounds like one I'd want to take that would relate to a CTE classroom that has any kind of lab facility, as well as a public learning makerspace like this. And so there you can click through this site and maybe learn a little bit more. I like it because it gives you an idea of the types of curriculum or the breadth of curriculum concepts and objectives that would be in these types of courses related to courses that we might have in career and technical ed, including coding and computational thinking, etc. I don't want to spend a ton of time on these resources because I want you to be able to have time to explore them as you see fit related to the engagement questions this week. Now, this is a site, what's next for maker education, and quite honestly, that graphic kind of makes me crazy if I leave it up there too long. But this is sponsored by Adobe, and it's EdSurge is the website, and they are looking at these different maker spaces and give you some definitions. I really want to just skip down through this to get to some graphs. Now you see it, now you don't. That's moving from Legos to Arduino boards. And there's some other resources, explore it you will. But when I scroll down here, this is the thing that made me keep this in our resources this week. Maker fairs have grown in the number of attendance over years. So while I'm saying I think that some of the buzz about this is flattening, when you take a look at these type of descriptive stats, maker fairs over since this I believe up to 2014 or 2015. These are the number of K-12 maker fairs, and those are only ones being registered on makerfair.com. These are mini maker fairs, and you can see that they've, based on what's being registered there, they've been growing, these maker fairs. So you can take a look at this. It shows you the numbers of attendees or participants in those maker fairs. And then here you have some additional resources. Again, if you're interested in some of these topics, you can click through them. This one right here, Department of Education CTE Makeover Boot Camp Webinars. So these are some resources that were put together by CTE for ways to engage students in maker fairs and in public schools in some cases. And some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, opening it public, what are kinds of liabilities that we have? These are the types of questions that school districts are asking, but the public is saying these are public facilities and they should be made available. So that's part of the discussion, and you can see some additional resources down here that you can click through at your leisure, the ones that interest you related to maker spaces. Okay, get off that particular graphic. I really like this graphic. I looked at it for a long time on Daylight University Press's page. The Movement in a Making, this is from 2014. They have an executive summary about what this maker space is all about and what makes a maker. And that really it's about the innovation and creativity. And as you read through that, you'll see a lot about the 4 C's. But again, they had some interesting statistics down here related to the movement and how it gathers momentum. And this is a little old, it's 2014, but I'm still seeing grants to maker spaces. I'm still seeing them grow in popularity regarding public spaces and public libraries. So I left this here for you to also peruse as you take a look at what the maker space is, get yourself more familiar with what it looks like as a social movement. There are tons of blogs and Twitter pages devoted to makers and maker spaces. So this is a pretty good article that goes down how do you have the maker space in your school, what it might look like, some personal testimonials. Yeah, maker to maker. This guy right here, Dale Dougherty, is probably the there is a TEDx talk with him. It was a little long, and I wanted you to really look at some of the readings because we want to look at more just the maker movement. But if you're very interested in some of the root beginnings, you Google his TEDx talk, you'll hear a little bit more what he has to say about innovation and the maker to maker and maker to market ideas for developing, and in this case, entrepreneurs with really quality ideas. Anyway, that's that second, or I don't know how many we're on, third link that I have. Makerspace for Education. If you really just want to know who are these folks, feel free to click about us and you'll see who sponsors these programs. Oftentimes it's tech companies. Intel sponsors some. The Gates Foundation sponsors some. They have curriculum resources here. I'm reminding you that these are mostly for informal education, meaning they're not typically linked to any kind of standards. And while we're on that topic, I've mentioned that next generation science standards are really what we kind of hold ourselves accountable to STEM. But I want to do a little backpedaling because if I think it was about week 4 where I said that the place that I felt like NGSS was soft was technology. And that's where these maker spaces, these social movements have really picked up the gauntlet, if you will, for moving the T ahead and linking it to engineering. And I also mentioned way back in like when we're talking about the T and the E, that ITEA has probably the best standards for technology. Most of you, when you submitted your assignments, didn't reference those. Those would have been okay. NGSS or ITEAs if you were looking at technology. So those of you involved in digital learning, business education, computer skills, you should really, there might be some technology and electronics, not electronics, engineering design in NGSS, but feel free to use those other national standards because also in the world of STEM, the T and the E are just as important, but we just need to have more than just one. It's 2 or more of those disciplines. Anyway, I invite you to click through this particular site and take a look at design thinking in particular, and what they use here, constructionism and constructivism, those are the ways of learning in a maker space. And I think most of you are familiar with this term. If you're not, go ahead and look it up. And there's research supporting this type of learning, Piaget in particular, but there's some good learning theory behind learning in this way. Interestingly enough, the controversial or the critical article you have this week, he cites cognitivism, and those of you who have had any research methodologies know that cognitivism is a different way of thinking about how people learn. And that's why I ask you to think critically about the resources provided. And constructivism, that's the camp of Dewey. That's where the maker space is. Really, that's the home of CTE. But I want you to have or see other points of view or understand that they're out there and how you need to maybe frame what you're thinking about in terms of your CTE program, STEM, and these maker or social movements, if you will, that are related. Bring this in here a little. This is Maker Education. I believe this one is brought to you by Intel or supported in that way. What they offer, you are watching a movie this week from this website. They have resources, tools and materials, spaces and places. You might find these as really interesting resources for improving your own laboratory spaces that you have. The About Us, which is right here. Click on that, and again, you can find out who supports these organizations. This is actually the movie that you're watching this week. Link down in YouTube. I thought this one had Intel on it, but I know I saw it here someplace. You can poke around here and see. Most of these are publicly, they are private foundations, 501c3s, but they have the support of industry. The journal is a technology journal, and this is a very short article about 7 tips for planning a makerspace. Use any available space. It gives you really just 7 quick tips how to create them, provides a few links, a couple of photos. This is a pretty tidy makerspace. Second page, comments on the bottom if you want to look at those. Of course, they've got to have advertisements. That's how they get these things paid for. This is that the journal of THE, the Journal of Technology. This is the Journal of Technology. That they have some other ideas here for involving stakeholders, choosing tools based on pedagogical goals, and starting small. And that's a really good idea if you're going to have any kind of space like this. Now, remember when I mentioned that you can take a look at what does a maker space look like? Well, I've also provided a link here. What Maker Faire ideas do you have? So what's being made in these maker places? And Make Magazine or Maker Magazine has tons of ideas here. There's, yeah. At first I started putting up some different ideas, but you can take a look at these on your own. They have tons of hands-on activities, kits, things for Arduino boards, on and on and on. That's out of Make Magazine. They have projects up here on top. Click on that, you'll see they put them in different categories. Here we go, technology, craft and design, business things, science, drones, really just a ton of things. And this is just one website for these maker spaces. And then of course, I think you may have seen there's a Pinterest board here when I Googled it that also has these kinds of things related to maker and make what makers might do in this space. Here they are, Make Magazine, Pinterest, on and on and on. While I'm here, let's just Google maker spaces so you can get an idea of what they look like. Let's click on images. And yes, and you might notice adults. Quite honestly, the population in maker spaces, if you look at them demographically, are over 18, except for in the state of Utah, where most of ours have been developed for kids. But many of these maker spaces are places where adults can come together and have these tools available to them to work on various projects. Here's a kind of a classroom exhibit. I actually took a look at this one, Makerspace for Education. We were on that site a moment ago. It's missing some of the things that I sometimes see, including sewing machines and sinks and refrigerators and ovens, things that we typically would find in a family consumer science classroom. But if you scroll down here, you can see there is a big emphasis on technology, games. You may also see that they have these types of digital boards, on and on, the different types of maker spaces that you have. This one has a lot of woodworking going on. This one has young children, but nationwide, most of these are used by adults and adults coming in with their children in an informal way. So that's a little bit about what they look like. All right. I believe we're getting to the last 2 here. How to turn your school into a maker haven. This is a little bit of an older, well, it's 2014, but this has some good tips for, is this possible to do in your school? And realizing that schools are a big system and there may be pushback from the school. How you're going to meet the standards. I thought this was an interesting part of this article. It's very short, so you can just scan through this. And this is to give you some ideas about what these look like if you're not familiar with them, and to answer the engagement questions about how you feel like they might be able to be part of a CTE type of classroom, whether yours has a lot of lab facility or a smaller lab facility, or maybe you are working in an ATC where you have specific equipment and you say to yourself, I'm going to let them go through Genius Hour. I'm going to let them see, work on any problems they might see in my lab or open other lab facilities to them. And right here, this is the Hour of Code website. And here's that quote about the Hour of Code and how it is conducted. I know several schools in our state, in the state of Utah, um, work inside. And I think there's a few of you in this course that have done the Hour of Code and walk students through how to code, but it's gaining some steam. I would say this one right here, the Hour of Code, is really picked up in terms of participation, and they talk about that here on this website. So if you're not familiar with Hour of Code, people create code to do lots of things, things that things that would be as simple as like turning on lights in a certain place to creating code to make wearable technology, clothing, and those sorts of things. So it is the ideas here is almost, it's linked to Genius Hour, but in terms of you're creating your own ideas, you're working on your own projects, but in this case you're using code. And then the Genius Hour, you have a link as well, and you'll be watching this video in case you're not familiar with this. This is Google's idea that came to fruition now, and proponents of it are wanting this to be part of school to give folks a time to really like, what is it I'm interested in? What engages me? In terms of the Genius Hour, I want you to also be thinking about this in terms of project-based learning because they identify a question, but I think that you'll see that there are some differences in the way this is conducted, individuals versus teams, and informal education, self-directed learning versus collaborative learning like we see in PBL. So feel free to make those contrasts as you work through the engagement questions. All right, those are the links that we have this week. And let me get back here. And then these videos here. But I want to just sum up here with this last slide. What are the implications of social movements on formal education, CTE, and STEM education? As you can see, most of them are related to STEM. We've already talked about how STEM can be contextualized in CTE. But the bigger question around is going to be management of facilities, accountability, and that means grades. And I put this grades versus badges. Oftentimes in these social movements, they're using technology to validate whether people learn the content. And you've seen it in terms of certificates. You earn a certificate. That certificate becomes part of your portfolio. And now that's all being EI'd. That's my word. That means that they're becoming part of e-portfolios. And badging has become a big way to validate what somebody knows. And I don't talk about badging in this course because it's a way of doing evaluation and assessment. And I hope that that has been covered in your evaluation and assessment course. If not, feel free to Google it and learn more about badging. But these badges are they're currency of the technology fields. And in fact, if you have a portfolio with a badge, it's almost like having the currency, if you will, I mean literal currency, like $100 bills, where if you hold it up to the light, it's hard to counterfeit them. They've made it so it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, and I don't want to say impossible because then somebody will do it, but very difficult to make a counterfeit of these badges. And so this is showing you Purdue has gone to this, and I know the University of Pittsburgh is also doing badging for several of their courses in lieu of grades, and it's competency based. Did you earn this badge? And most of you are familiar with badges, so if you're familiar with Girl Scouting and Boy Scouting, it's not did you pass with a C 75% or 85%. They set the marker usually at 80 or 85%, and you don't earn that badge until you're competent in it. And that's what you see a lot of inside of these social type networking areas where you bring some sort of STEM education, not social networking, social movements for STEM or CTE, and you decide, we're not going to really grade this. This is going to be competency based. You're going to get a badge whether you do or do not know it. And if you earn that badge, I'm going to give you an A. So that's something that you'll see discussed in some of the resources. We're also talking here about measurement for achievement. And as I mentioned, the achievement is completely competency based, oftentimes based on your ability to perform in some sort of authentic setting. So that's my overview of CTE STEM related to these social movements. I look forward to the discussion. And yes, there are some complexities within the questions, but feel free to cite some sources and support your opinions on these social movements and how they can be interfaced within career and technical education and along the lines of STEM within the discussion posts.